You've been everyone's therapist since you were old enough to understand emotions. The friend who listens at 3 in the morning. The family member who mediates every conflict. The partner who absorbs everyone's pain and somehow makes it lighter for them. You've spent your entire life fixing people who never asked if you needed fixing too. And one day, something breaks. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like a light switch flipping off. You stop reaching out. You stop offering solutions. You stop carrying weight that was never yours to carry. And the silence that follows is deafening. Carl Jung called this the death of the false self. The moment the empath stops performing the role they were assigned before they even knew there was a choice. What happens next isn't what most people expect. It's not a gentle transition into healthier boundaries. It's an earthquake. And Jung understood why. Because when you stop healing others, you're not just changing your behavior. You're destroying an entire economy that was built on your depletion. If you've ever felt guilty for protecting your energy, this isn't about teaching you to be selfish. This is about understanding what Jung discovered, that the compulsion to heal others is often the deepest wound, pretending to be a strength. Let me show you what actually happens when that wound finally stops running your life. First, understand what being an empath really means in Jungian terms. It's not just sensitivity. It's not just feeling deeply. Jung would say it's a particular defense mechanism that developed so early you don't even remember learning it. You learn to read emotional environments the way a deer learns to sense predators. Not because you were naturally gifted, because your survival depended on it. Maybe your parents' mood determined whether home was safe that day. Maybe expressing your own needs caused chaos, so you learned to anticipate and meet everyone else's needs first. Maybe love was conditional on how well you managed other people's emotions. Whatever the origin, you developed hyperempathy as an adaptation. You became the emotional radar, the fixer, the healer. And somewhere along the way, that survival mechanism became your identity. Jung wrote about this in his work on the persona. The persona is the mask we wear, the role we play in society. But for the empath, the persona isn't just a mask, it's a prison. You're not performing empathy. You're trapped in it. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to sense what someone needs and provide it. Not because you want to, because you can't not. The mechanism runs automatically. And here's what Jung understood that most people miss. When you're compulsively healing others, you're not actually healing them. You're preventing them from facing their own darkness. You're interrupting a necessary process. Jung called this process individuation, the journey toward becoming whole. And that journey requires walking through your own shadow, confronting your own pain, integrating your own broken pieces. When you step in as the healer, you rob people of that journey. You make it easier for them to avoid their work. And in doing so, you avoid yours. Because as long as you're focused on everyone else's wounds, you never have to look at your own. That's the real function of compulsive helping. It's not generosity, it's distraction. So what happens when you stop? The first thing is that people get confused. They're used to you being available, endlessly patient, always willing to listen, to help, to fix. When you suddenly aren't, they don't understand. They reach out and you don't respond immediately. They share a problem and you don't offer a solution. They're in pain and you don't try to make it better. And they interpret this as coldness, as something wrong with you. You've changed. You're different. You're not the person they knew. And they're right. You're not. The person they knew was a false self, performing a role to earn love and avoid abandonment. The person you're becoming is someone who exists without needing to be useful. Jung would say this confusion is inevitable. because the people around you weren't relating to you as a whole person. They were relating to your function. You were the designated healer in their life, the emotional support character. When you step out of that role, they lose something they depended on. And most people, when they lose something they depend on, don't respond with understanding. They respond with demands that you return to your role. This is the second thing that happens, the guilt. It comes in waves. Every time someone reaches out and you don't respond the way you used to, you feel it. That familiar pull, the voice that says you're being selfish, cruel, abandoning people who need you. The voice that says a good person would help, a caring person would be there. But Jung would ask you a question. Whose voice is that really? Is it your authentic self speaking? Or is it the internalized voice of everyone who benefited from your depletion? Because here's what Jung discovered about guilt. Real guilt comes from violating your own values. False guilt comes from violating someone else's expectations of you. If you genuinely believe that your purpose is to heal everyone around you at the expense of yourself, then stopping would create real guilt. But if that belief was installed in you by people who needed you to believe it, then the guilt is false. It's programming, and programming can be questioned. The third thing that happens is that people start leaving. Not everyone, but some. The ones who were only there because of what you provided. The relationships that were built on you being the giver and them being the taker. When you stop giving, there's nothing left. No foundation, no real connection. Just a transactional arrangement where you provided emotional labor and they provided the illusion of relationship. Jung talked about this in his work on projection. People project onto you what they need you to be. The empath becomes a screen for everyone else's needs. And when you stop accepting those projections, when you stop playing the role they assigned you, they have to face the reality that they never actually knew you. They knew the function you performed, and functions are replaceable. This is devastating at first. Watching people you thought cared about you walk away when you stop being useful. But Jung would say this devastation is necessary because it reveals the truth. And the truth, however painful, is what sets you free. You can't build an authentic life on false relationships. You have to let the false ones die so real ones have room to grow. The fourth thing that happens, and this is where it gets uncomfortable, is that you discover how much of your identity was wrapped up in being the healer. When you stop healing others, you're left with a question you've been avoiding your entire life. Who are you when you're not fixing someone? What do you want when you're not managing someone else's needs? What does your life look like when it's actually yours? Jung called this the confrontation with the shadow. The shadow isn't just your dark side. It's everything you've rejected, suppressed, denied about yourself. And for the compulsive healer, the shadow includes all the parts of you that wanted to be selfish, that wanted to prioritize yourself, that wanted to say no without guilt. You've been at war with those parts of yourself because you believed they were bad, wrong, unacceptable, but they're not. They're the parts that know you're a human being with needs, not an infinite resource for everyone else. And when you stop healing others, those parts finally have space to speak. And what they say is often, "I'm tired. I've been carrying everyone else and nobody's been carrying me. I don't want to do this anymore." That voice terrifies the old version of you. Because if you listen to it, everything changes. Your relationships change. Your self-concept changes. The way you move through the world changes. You become someone who exists for themselves, not for others. And the programming you've carried your whole life says, that's the worst thing you could be. But Jung would say, that's the only thing you can be if you want to be whole. Because wholeness requires integration. You can't integrate the parts of yourself that you're at war with. You can't become whole while rejecting your own needs. You can't individuate while living as a function in everyone else's life. The fifth thing that happens is that you stop attracting certain types of people. This is subtle but crucial. When you're in healer mode, you emit a frequency, not literal, but psychological. You broadcast availability, willingness to carry weight, capacity to absorb pain. And certain people, the ones Jung might call unconscious or stuck in their own shadow, are drawn to that frequency like moths to flame. They're not necessarily bad people. They're just people who haven't learned to heal themselves, who are looking for someone to do that work for them, and you've been that person. But when you stop broadcasting that availability, they stop showing up. Not because you're rejecting them, because there's nothing for them to attach to. What replaces them is space. Lots of space. And in that space, if you can tolerate it, something new can grow. You might attract people who are also doing their own work, who don't need you to fix them, who can meet you as an equal instead of as a savior. These relationships feel different, less intense, less urgent, but more real. Jung would say, this is what happens when you stop living through your persona and start living through yourself. The self, in Jungian terms, is the totality of who you are. Conscious and unconscious. Light and shadow, human and whole. When you're performing the healer role, you're living through a fragment. When you stop, you create the possibility of living through the whole. Now let's talk about the most difficult part, the realization that you are using other people's problems to avoid your own. This is what Jung meant when he said the helping professions attract the most wounded. Not because wounded people are more compassionate, because helping others is an effective way to never look at your own pain. Every hour you spent listening to someone else's trauma was an hour you didn't spend sitting with yours. Every solution you offered someone else was proof you could fix things, even though you couldn't fix yourself. Every person you saved validated your worth in a way you never learned to validate internally. When you stop healing others, you lose that distraction. And what surfaces is everything you've been running from. Your own unprocessed grief, your own unmet needs, your own unhealed wounds. And there's no one to fix them but you. No one to save you the way you saved everyone else. Just you, alone with the weight you've been avoiding by carrying everyone else's. This is what Jung called the dark night of the soul, the moment where you have to face the truth that you can't think your way out of, can't help your way out of, can't perform your way out of. You have to actually feel what you've been avoiding feeling, and that's terrifying, because what you might feel is worthless without a function, unlovable without being useful, empty without someone to fill. But on the other side of that terror is something Jung promised was there, the self, not the persona, not the role, the actual core of who you are. And that core doesn't need to be useful to exist. It doesn't need to be needed to have value. It just is, complete, whole, enough. Getting there requires what Jung called active imagination, sitting with the discomfort, dialoguing with the parts of yourself that are screaming in protest, listening to what they actually need instead of what you've been telling them to need, and slowly, painfully, learning to give yourself what you've been giving everyone else: patience, compassion, the benefit of the doubt, permission to be imperfect and still worthy. Here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. The compulsion to heal others isn't about them. It's about you. It's about a wound so deep you don't even recognize it as a wound anymore. The wound that says you have to earn your existence, that you have no inherent value, that love is something you have to work for, not something you deserve simply for being alive. When you heal that wound, the compulsion stops, not because you become callous or uncaring, because you no longer need external validation to feel whole. You can still help people, but it's a choice, not a compulsion. You can still be compassionate, but from a place of overflow, not from depletion. You can still be there for others, but after you've been there for yourself. This is what Jung meant by individuation, becoming who you actually are instead of who you needed to be to survive. And for the empath, that process requires stopping the performance, stopping the fixing, stopping the endless giving. Not forever necessarily, but long enough to hear yourself think, long enough to feel yourself feel, long enough to remember that you exist even when you're not being useful to someone else. What happens when you stop healing others isn't that you become cold, it's that you become real. And real is uncomfortable for people who are comfortable with your performance. Real doesn't martyr itself. Real has boundaries. Real says no. Real prioritizes its own oxygen mask before helping others with theirs. Real is selfish in the sense that it has a self to be selfish with. And here's the paradox Jung understood. When you stop compulsively healing others, you become capable of actually helping them. Because helping from wholeness looks completely different than helping from woundedness. Helping from wholeness doesn't create dependency, doesn't rob people of their own journey, doesn't secretly resent them for needing you while simultaneously needing them to need you. Helping from wholeness says, I see you're struggling. I'm here if you need support, but I trust you to do your own work. I won't do it for you. That kind of help is rare because it requires having done your own work first, and most people haven't. Most people are still running from their shadows by shining light on everyone else's. So what do you actually do? How do you stop when stopping feels like dying? Jung would say you start small. You practice saying no to things you would have said yes to automatically. Not because you want to hurt anyone, because you want to learn that you survive the discomfort of disappointing people. You practice sitting with your own pain instead of distracting yourself with someone else's. 5 minutes at first, then 10, then an hour. You practice asking for help instead of only giving it. This one is brutal for empaths. Asking reveals need, and you've spent your life hiding your needs behind the appearance of being the strong one. But Jung would say, asking for help is how you learn that you're allowed to receive, that relationships can be mutual, that you don't have to earn care by providing care. You practice noticing when the compulsion arises. Someone shares a problem, and immediately you feel that pull, that urgency to fix it. Instead of acting on it, you pause, you notice it, you ask yourself, is this mine to fix? Is this person asking for a solution or just sharing? What happens if I just listen instead of fixing? And often, you discover that just listening is enough, that people don't always need you to fix them. Sometimes, they just need to be heard. This is where Jung's concept of the witness becomes crucial. The part of you that can observe yourself without judgment. When you're acting as the witness, you can see the pattern without being controlled by it. You can feel the compulsion without obeying it. And over time, that space between feeling and acting becomes wider, becomes a place where choice lives. But I need to be honest with you. This process is not pretty. There will be people who get angry, who accuse you of changing for the worse, who tell you the old you was better. Let them. Their discomfort with your growth is not your responsibility to manage. There will be times you doubt yourself, when you wonder if maybe you are being selfish, if maybe you should go back to the way things were. Don't. Trust the discomfort. It means you're growing. There will be loneliness, the kind that makes you want to return to old patterns just to feel connected again. But Jung would remind you that loneliness is different from aloneness. Loneliness is the pain of being disconnected from others. Aloneness is the peace of being connected to yourself. And sometimes you have to walk through loneliness to reach aloneness. And there will be grief. Grief for the relationships that don't survive your transformation. Grief for the version of yourself you have to let die. Grief for all the years you spent being what everyone needed instead of discovering what you needed. That grief is valid. Feel it. Jung would say that unfelt grief becomes the shadow. Feel it now so it doesn't haunt you later. Here's what waits on the other side. You wake up one morning and realize you haven't thought about fixing anyone in days. You receive a message from someone in crisis and you don't feel that automatic pull. You choose to respond with care, but not at the cost of yourself. You set a boundary and the guilt doesn't come. Or it comes and leaves quickly instead of lingering for days. You notice you have energy. Energy that used to be constantly drained by everyone else's needs. Energy for your own projects, your own interests, your own life. You start to remember what you actually enjoy instead of only knowing what others enjoy. You discover preferences you didn't know you had because you've spent so long adapting to everyone else's. And the most profound thing, you realize you're enough, just as you are, without fixing anyone, without being needed, without proving your worth through service. You exist and that's sufficient. This is what Jung called the realization of the self. The moment you stop living through the ego's need for external validation and start living through the self's inherent completeness. What happens when the empath stops healing others is this. You stop being an empath in the compulsive sense and become a whole person who happens to have empathy. That's not a small distinction. One is a cage. The other is a gift. One runs your life. The other enriches it. One depletes you. The other comes from overflow. Jung's truth is simple, but not easy. You can't heal others until you heal yourself. And you can't heal yourself while you're busy healing everyone else. So you have to stop. Not because you're selfish, because you're finally ready to face the wound that made you believe love was something you had to earn by being useful. The people who love you for you will understand. The people who loved you for your function will leave. Both outcomes are necessary. Both outcomes are liberating. And both outcomes bring you closer to the only thing that actually matters. Living as yourself instead of as everyone else's solution. That's Jung's truth. Not that empaths are special, but that empaths are human, and humans need to save themselves before they can genuinely help anyone else. If this hits something in you, you know what to do. The work is waiting, your work, not anyone else's. Finally, yours.